In the Newsroom is a production in partnership with Studio Stillwater. Every week, journalists from the Stillwater NewsPress invite listeners to join us in the newsroom and hear the story behind the stories. Hello and welcome to In the Newsroom. I'm editor Bo Simmons. This is the crew of the Stillwater NewsPress. I have with me today Chris Peters, who I guess until we figure out what your title is, what your job, we'll still call you producer.
There we go.
Right? That works.
That works.
Yeah. City editor Michelle Charles.
Hello.
And reporter.
I was like,
Yeah,
we're
right.
going to say hello.
We always forgot.
I'm like, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Ashlynd Huffman.
Hello.
There she is. So this is sort of a full disclosure moment. There's only a handful of us, but most newsrooms have very defined beats, and often education is one of those beats, and that is a place where, like, man, we would just love some help, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
if anyone, like, I love our product, but yeah, if we could, if we had more education news, all the better. So Michelle's been branching out a little bit this week, moving away from city government, which
Yes.
has been, hasn't, and they haven't done anything for really 2 weeks outside of that state of emergency because they haven't met in a couple weeks. So you've been on the education beat.
Yes.
You went to a meeting. This is a good story because
Going to a meeting you weren't invited to.
No.
Yeah.
No, actually the opposite. It just wasn't what we thought it was.
Oh.
She was invited. She just wasn't expected by all parties.
That is the
Yes.
case. That is the case. We thought it was a meeting with the Board of Education and a group of parents. And that would, by definition, be an open meeting. That would always be an open meeting. And instead, it was just a bunch of parents getting together with the superintendent to talk about some things. I wasn't asked to leave. He was very gracious. Didn't, seem upset about it at all. But when I was getting ready to leave, he said, "So, did one of the parents invite you?" So, it was one of those things where they had not planned for me to be there, and I don't think they were planning on having any coverage of that particular meeting. Or they might have, I don't know, probably had their communications person there or something.
Right. And like under whatever open meeting legalities there are, whatever, it's like,
Right.
yeah, that could have been a private meeting.
Right.
They very well could have kicked you out, and we'd have been like, hey, Michelle got kicked out of a meeting.
Which is probably why they
Right.
didn't kick me out.
Which
or ask
probably
me to
wouldn't have
leave.
made it in the paper then,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, that would probably, in some ways, that might have been a more exciting story, right? Which is probably why people don't do that. That would be the best reason for people to not do that. Because then everyone goes, I wonder what they didn't want them to report. So,
Well, I thought
We
it
do
was
have to look
interesting
at
because I hadn't known anything about improvements to Couch Park being planned and that rendering and stuff that was posted. I was like, oh, well, this looks cool. This looks
sure,
interesting.
for people unfamiliar, that
Yes.
that was a meeting of softball parents who had, in response to conditions of a Title IX settlement
Right.
that the school had.
Right. Basically, there was a group of parents who mainly affiliated with the softball teams, with the junior high and the high school softball team, who felt like, their facilities weren't as good. They were always getting the crappy buses. There were a few things that they just seemed to, it was their impression anyway, right? They didn't feel like they were getting satisfaction going to the school district. Wound up filing a Title IX suit. I mean, it got pretty heated to the point where there was a filing in federal court. The parties opted to settle instead of going to a trial or anything like that. The district didn't admit any wrongdoing, but but it is paying like $20,000 in legal fees for the parents. But they've got a list of things that they're going to address. And I would say that the people at the district probably do honestly want to be fair to the kids. I was talking about this when I came back in the newsroom last night, that when I was in high school, I lived in a little town in Oklahoma, like many of us, and, they built a new gym, and they called it the boys' gym. And then there was a gym in the old condemned school building that we didn't even use for classes anymore. And they called that the girls' gym. We got hand-me-down uniforms from the boys one year for our softball team. Before that, we looked like a church rec league team. We had matching T-shirts, and that was about it. So, I mean, there is kind of a long history of women's sports getting shorter shrift.
Well,
but with the passage of Title
Right.
IX, there are a lot of requirements, and I think districts do try to take it seriously. But I also think that things are a lot better than they were, but I think that maybe we're coming out of such an area of deep lack of awareness about the importance that either you have some people who are very sensitive to any shortchanging, and then you have other people who feel like, oh, it's come so far, it must be pretty good compared to what it was when I was in school, and it's still maybe not completely equal.
Well,
So,
and something it wasn't exactly in your story, but part of the background, when the holidays moved back, part of what they did was help fund improvements to the baseball field, which sort of
Right.
like set off, now we gotta, now we need to improve the softball field.
Well,
Yeah.
it created a little bit of
Yeah.
not a crisis, but it created the need
Right.
to address that. And that's actually one of the things, I didn't get to explore it a whole lot in the story, but there's actually a foundation that was set up quite a ways back. I need to learn more about it. It's called the SAFE Foundation. It's a nonprofit, 501c3, set up so that people could make tax-deductible contributions to school sporting programs, and it's to meet budget shortfalls. Think of it like the PTA fundraiser that would allow the wrestling team to get new mats if it's not in the school budget, something like that. They've tried to set it up so that there's going to be an endowment, and then once that endowment hits, I believe, $1 million, they'll start giving out grants or start distributing money to all the sports. But until then, people can also use it as a pass-through for donations. So say, I just want to make a donation to the sport that my kid is active in. I would do that through this foundation. It would be tax deductible. And the Superintendent Mark Moore, he didn't say a whole lot about it, but he indicated that moving forward, there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on this type of stuff, because I think before it was just like, oh, a donation, thank you very much, and it was accepted without necessarily looking at whether it created an inequity. And so now, if it's going to be looked at a lot more critically, and if there's a donation, big or small, if it creates a situation that's problematic because it puts the district in Title IX violation, they may not be able to accept that donation. So there's going to have to be a lot more communication. And that was one of the major things I got out of the meeting, is that communication is going to be really key. When you want to make a donation, communicating about how the donations should be done, communicating with the parents involved in all the programs. And then when the parent's having a concern, saying something as soon as they have that concern, making sure everybody feels heard and that they are truly communicating with each other. I think most of these things, think about how many people would stay out of court if everybody could just talk to each other.
I don't think
Like
lawyers
human
would like
beings.
that very much.
But seriously, so I think that would fix a lot of it. There's a lot of distrust, and there's still a lot of hard feelings. To be honest, you could feel it in the room. There was a tension, and there's like some some skepticism, I guess. But I do believe that Dr. Moore really is trying to fix it, and that they're making a commitment to do better moving forward. I just think maybe there hasn't been as much thought, directed toward all the impacts, because so many times it's not the intent, it's the impact. There are so many things that have unintended consequences, and people can mean to do good things and inadvertently create a problem somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the things that we've covered at the school lately, but of course now we've got some more stuff coming up tonight.
Some of the stuff that they're asking for sounds like more like maintenance. They're not like saying, hey, the boys got all this fancy new stuff. We want fancy new stuff too. They want basic stuff like mold removed and the dugouts cleaned up and some basic maintenance.
There was a lot of deferred maintenance. And for whatever reason, the women's facilities did seem to be in worse shape. I don't know if they hadn't gotten as many donations or what. I mean, there's always that idea that the school district's always kicking around, like, what do we do with our baseball facilities? Because they're located over in Couch Park across town from the high school. The district had actually bought the shopping center to the north of the high school years ago with the idea of sort of creating its own little mini athletic village. At some point, the baseball stadiums were supposed to be moved there, or the ballparks. And that hasn't happened yet. I don't even think it's part of the next bond issue that they're talking about. But it's possible that there was a reluctance to invest a whole lot of money in something that they didn't know how long they were going to be using it. The problem is when you have all that deferred maintenance, things just get worse and worse. And once you have leaks, stuff starts to fall apart.
Okay. So
yeah. Anyway,
informal poll.
Yes.
Ashlynd, also high school in rural Oklahoma.
Yes.
Was ninth grade part of the high school?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Was it weird at all, or just seemed like business as usual? Right? You moved from junior high to high school.
Yeah, the high school was it was up a hill, but yeah, that sounded really dumb, but yeah, it was
physically, when we shifted from one to the other,
you went up to the high school.
Literally, yeah. So
yes, a very literal difference.
The middle school
and
was
getting from one place to another. Yes, there was.
Yeah, but the thing is, in ninth grade, some of the classes were also in the junior high and the high school. Okay. So you had to walk from one building to the next. Sometimes you had 3 different buildings you'd go to.
We're leaving all of this in, Ashlynd.
Oh, man.
Man.
Michelle?
Now, in my school, once you hit 7th grade, you were in the high school building.
Ew.
And it was terrifying.
Oh.
You were basically a child, and you're standing there watching the seniors make out against the back wall at lunchtime. It was so scary.
Well, when we went to high school, they still had, like, smoking areas for seniors.
Yes!
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I started to mention that, then I thought it would make me sound too old.
Not covered wagons, but we did have smoking areas. How about you, Chris?
I actually went to 2 different high schools and 3 different buildings. So I had grown up. So this was in Ohio and in West Virginia, and for both those school systems I was in, high school was 9 through 12.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how it was for me.
And we just had a junior high. Middle school was not a thing.
So here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, it becomes a big deal.
But it was not always this way. At one point, the high school was 9th through 12th here.
Yeah.
So what is it now?
It is, it's 10th through 12th. But freshmen are still technically considered to be in high school for a lot of purposes. They're just across town at the junior high and have to be bused for a bunch of activities.
Ridiculous.
So it is a different kind of situation, and it's not necessarily the norm across the country. There's been a lot of discussion about it in Stillwater, though, for quite a few years, actually.
So you got a meeting tonight. Our columnist Julie Couch has written about it a little bit, but what is the meeting you're going to?
Basically, it's to gather public input about grade reconfiguration. Our elementary schools seem to be kind of chronically overcrowded or at capacity. And it's sort of weird because they'll tell me, I'll say, well, how many students do you have? And they'll say, we have 629 students. And I'll say, okay, well, so the new school you're going to build, how big is it going to be? Always thinking it's going to be like 700, 750, something like that. And they'll say, 600. And I'm just like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And I finally got someone to say, well, that's just kind of what we think is a good manageable size. That's what we like. So every once in a while, they have to do some redistricting or something, move something around. If you've got one school that, where enrollment's lower, so they shift kids around. But one of the other ways that they're looking at doing this is shifting the grades. Right now, elementary school is pre-K through 5th grade, basically. And then you have the 6th and 7th graders at the middle school. You have the 8th and 9th graders at the junior high, 10th through 12th at the high school. They're looking at possibly maybe having elementary school be 1st through 4th grade, having 5th and 6th grade at the middle school, moving everything around, 7th and 8th junior high, doing 9th grade at the high school. it's something that has been controversial. It's sort of weird because people act like it's unheard of. Years ago, under a previous superintendent, there were parents who were furious. I covered a meeting at the Stillwater Community Center where a mom marched up to the podium and demanded to know how the school officials were going to keep her freshman daughter from dating a senior boy.
You can't. The answer is you can't.
Well, and the idea is they're kind of seeing each other anyway, and everybody's on social media, and they don't have to be in the same building.
Yeah, maybe like 20 years ago or longer than that. Yeah, maybe the distance would have helped. Nowadays,
not so much. But there's sort of a compromise. They're looking at building what they're calling like a 9th grade center, which is would basically be on the high school campus, but they'd be in their own little separate building, sort of segregated
That just sounds
from the
kinda
older
weird.
kids. Yeah, it is. It's kind of different. So we'll see what they finally come up with. I mean, this group of parents may not be as worked up about it. They might not be as upset as those parents from 5 years ago. We'll see. I mean, we will definitely see. I'll probably see some of it tonight. It depends on how many people show up and how involved they are. Now, because Julie kind of addressed that in her column, right?
Yeah, she kind of addressed that she seemed like things were being rushed.
You're talking about specifically planning, is it, or not enough planning ahead of decisions?
Not allowing enough time for the public to really digest everything and give their input. Like a couple meetings done 2 weeks before, that are supposed to last an hour at a time, an hour each, done 2 weeks before the board apparently is supposed to consider it. So, her idea is it just hasn't been enough of I hate to use this word, it's become the new synergy for me, but a robust discussion. There hasn't been a robust enough discussion. That's the new business buzzword that I'm learning to hate.
Haven't we also
use it?
I mean, part of it, haven't we also just sort of struggled to get people to public meetings or, these
always.
Always. Not just for schools, but unless there's an issue that people want to protest or something, just getting someone in for like a listening session has not been, no one's been too keen on that for whether it's city government or schools or any of this.
Well, and now that they can't do virtual, I mean, I guess the school's probably still like broadcasting it where you can just watch, right? Online.
I see from the middle school cafeteria, I don't know if they were going to have that video capability.
Yeah.
Maybe they are. Maybe they'll record and put it out, but not necessarily. So when you change the venue, it gets complicated that way. I would say the reason that they had to have the meeting at the Stillwater Community Center all those years ago was because there were a bunch of parents who hated the superintendent and were really, really upset about what was going to happen to their 9th grade daughters. And so that we had a really good turnout for that. But it almost takes something like that. Someone has to be threatening your daughter's virtue, or you have to be really, really mad at somebody in order to show up for a meeting sometimes.
Maybe they just need to add something about masks on the agenda, and then everybody will show up.
You'll get a turnout then.
I just wonder if you couldn't, we have, Zoom or something like that where you just sort of open it to, I don't know how many people can be on a Zoom at one time or a listening session.
Quite a few.
Or, or maybe even just sort of Facebook Live or YouTube Live. I'm wondering if we don't need to go back to that if part of not gathering in public has to do with the pandemic. I don't know.
Well, and they could. I mean, they could put it on a Facebook Live, and they could even take questions. So, I mean, there are lots of things that would enable them to do that. And, it could be that if enough is said about people not having enough time to really digest it, I mean, the board can always put off making that decision, and I've seen them do that because they wanted people to have more time or they needed more information. Something else Julie brought up in her column was that, she served on the school board back in the 90s, and, they dealt with a couple of bond issues back then. And one of the things that she brought up was the preparation that they did and, demographic studies, population projections, and enrollment projections are a really important part of the planning process. She said that they're working on those right now, but they don't quite have them done yet. So also she's contending that it's really tough to make a decision when you don't even have good numbers to work with. So it may be one of those things where it's better for them to put it off a little bit until they do have those, a more solid idea of where they're going to be, because they're making these decisions based on, by the time they do this, the kids that are starting pre-K are going to be getting ready to go into middle school by the time all of this stuff is built.
Right.
So, I mean, they're working way ahead. So then you've got to think about like birth patterns and how many kindergartners you're going to have in 5 years. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to it. It's not just thinking about what you need next week.
I wonder how much our census has thrown people off who are trying to project demographics, since we were under almost 2,000 to 3,000 in what we projected our population growth, and whether that's real or, college students were not here when they needed to be counted. It's still got to throw off a lot of our data, I would think, that we've been trying to project for the last 7 or 8 years.
I would say we're probably not where we thought where they thought we would be. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, maybe some projections are off, and we need to look at birth patterns. I mean, a few years ago, they said that millennial women were actually having babies a little bit younger, and that there were people wanting to have it. Now we may have a group that is not having babies as young or having as many. I mean, you really do have to look at those birth patterns. So we're looking at Ashlynd. She's like, never. She's
doing these inaudible things. What
does this mean, Ashlynd?
Yeah.
No children.
Okay, so we don't have to factor your kid in.
No children.
Okay.
That's one data point.
There you go. We have one data point to make a decision on. Just take one kid off of that.
Extrapolate that into how many people would you represent in a 50,000 population town? Yeah.
Well, let's see. If it's my daughters, they're also not having children. They're just going to have a ton of dogs, they say. So, there you go. We have 3 data points now.
Okay. And they're also trying to build a new animal rescue. So we got to start counting dogs too.
So maybe we're just going to need a really big animal rescue for all the dogs.
Put me down for 15.
There you go.
Dogs. Right.
Good job.
Okay. Well, Ashlynd, you mentioned last week you were going to talk about an upcoming project. What's this project?
Okay. Do you want me to say the actual topic?
Yeah. I don't know how you don't say your topic.
Oh, okay.
No, let's go back. How could you talk about this without telling me what the topic was?
I don't know, Bo. I'm nervous.
This is like vague posting.
I would like to know.
So, Ashlynd, what is the topic of your special project that you've been working on for weeks?
Months.
Yeah, it is. It's sensitive. It's not a. The topic is not a laughing matter.
It's about as heavy as you can get.
Yeah, it's actually been pretty heavy in the newsroom as we've been discussing this.
You take a sort of a broad look and then a more intense look at child sexual abuse from all sort of different angles. But what's your overriding thing for the first one?
In the first one, it basically is an overview of what the crime is. And I talk with law enforcement, mental health therapists. I have, survivors that I've also spoken with that will be tied into the beginning. And then it also looks at, I built graphics and stuff about myths. A lot of people think someone from the park is going to snatch their kid up. And that's not typically how it is. Usually it's someone that the kid knows, typically a family member, a friend of the family, someone like that. And so I think that's kind of where it's very eye-opening, is a lot of people don't expect that at all.
And see, and Michelle, you editorialized about this. How long ago was that? Because we had the hijacking of the Save the Children or whatever it was.
Right.
The idea that the thing we don't focus on this, focus on the boogeyman out there. And so, tell us a little bit about what was going on at that time.
Well, last year, I mean, it was, there were
actual
during the election.
Rallies.
I mean, it was built
rallies.
That's how it started for me. Yeah. This is how the idea started, was from the hashtag Save Our Children.
the thing that really struck me about it was that it really did seem like an attempt to distract people, or to, basically as a distraction from other things that were going on. Because, these were people who were suddenly terribly, terribly concerned about this, who were sharing this hashtag, who were sharing all these posts about this sort of cabal of child sex abusers. And, these were people who had never posted anything about it before, who didn't seem to have any awareness of it prior to that. And as soon as the election was over, to be honest, they stopped. It totally died off. I haven't seen anything from most of these people since then. So, I mean, it was like a really weird sort of social media phenomenon that a lot of people got swept up in. And the thing is, it's really hard to take issue with it, because who the heck doesn't want to save the children? Mm-hmm. Who the heck doesn't want to pay attention to this? But what Ashlynd has been doing is she's been looking at the reality of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really important. It's like, more than a meme, more than a hashtag, more than some type of a social media movement, let's look at what's really going on in our communities. And that's what she's doing. That's the value.
Yeah. And since I cover court cases, I come across this crime all the time. But when I write those stories, I never put the family bond in my story. I never identify how the victim knows their abuser. And so I half expected people to be shocked at that point. But most of the cases are usually someone within the family. And I actually have 4 women from the same exact family with decades and decades of abuse. And they came forward in 2019 because their abuser had gotten married and was planning on adopting another child. If that would have never happened, they said they probably wouldn't have reported, because no one knew. They were all around the same age, except for one was significantly older, and they didn't know about each other. Everyone thought, oh, it just happened to me. It just happened to me. And then once they started talking about it, they realized, oh my gosh, he did this to all of us.
Well, and Ashlynd, I mean, one of the things that I've gotten from hearing you talk about this and from the stuff you're sharing with me is that, I mean, this is a difficult topic. It's hard to talk about. It's not pleasant to hear about. You don't want to think about it, right? Nobody wants to think about this. But the fact is, it needs secrecy.
Yes.
It needs shame and secrecy. It thrives in that.
Yes.
That's what fertilizes it and allows it to grow and flourish, as it were. And so I think by shining a light on that and bringing some awareness, I mean, that's really what you need to do. You've got to shine a light on it.
So it is very, there are intense parts and it is very emotional, but the key is just education. There's a lot of things that all 4 women have said that they want the community to know, that this is a crime that is underreported, and typically everyone knows a child or an adult who was at some point sexually abused as a child in their life. So.
And how important was it to them? What did it do for them to talk to you?
It started with one victim, or one survivor, and she actually wanted to just tell her story. And then I reached out to another woman, and she wanted to tell her story, and then it blossomed into 2 more coming forward and wanting to tell their story. And so they've been able to, their abuser is actually going through court. He gets sentenced next week. And so once he is sentenced is when all of this will come out. But they were able to take their shame that they have felt for years and years and years and kind of rethink or rewire their thinking about it. Because for so long, they have held on to shame and felt, to quote them, I felt dirty. I felt worthless. I felt like something was wrong with me. And I told him, I said, there's nothing wrong with you. It was him and his choices and his decisions. And so it kind of was like a therapeutic session, and they were able to just kind of unload everything and talk to me. And it wasn't like an interview. I told them, I said, this is a conversation. Speak however you want. I don't have to print everything you said. I won't print everything you said. But I want you to feel comfortable enough to say whatever it is that you want people to know.
That's really powerful. Yeah. I mean, just being able to get out from under that enough to talk about it and have someone listen to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because so often, the victims are not listened to. That's
Yeah.
another thing that comes out of it over and over again. So having someone listen to you and believe you has got to be an incredibly powerful thing for them.
Yeah, and it was shocking because that's exactly what they thanked me for. They said, "Oh, thank you for doing this. Thank you for letting me do this." And I'm like, "No, thank you for owning your story and helping people understand what this crime is, because I see it all the time in court. I see it all the time. I have to hear children testify all the time. But the community doesn't, unless they're sitting in a jury, they're not influenced by that. They don't come in and they don't see the police interviews and the civil center interviews. They're not subjected to that. And I see that daily. I just had one today, in fact. And so I just wanted the community to be educated on what this is. So the next time someone sits in a jury and they hear the defense say, "Well, why did you hang out with your grandpa if he did those things to you?" They will understand there is a bond within that child and their abuser.
Right. Right.
I wonder in how much of your early reporting maybe upends the sort of stranger danger mythos.
Oh, it's it's in the intro. It's very quick,
And it, not to say that, no, you don't want your kids getting in cars with strangers.
Yeah, obviously.
No.
But yeah, most of the harm done by, people are people in positions of care, caretakers.
But the other side of that is it was interesting that the online sexual exploitation was more likely to be done by a stranger than someone that they know. So that was very interesting. I found that out. So it's like the physical face-to-face is more likely to be someone your child knows. But over the internet, it's typically someone the child doesn't know.
Which is sort of new.
Yeah,
it
was very interesting.
In the last, 15 years or so.
Yeah. Different forms of leverage that abusers
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
so
different types of
advantage
access, too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really about access, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it's if you're able to talk to the child whenever they are seeking someone that they want to talk with, they need a friend, say that their mom and dad work a lot and they're wanting that interaction, they can get it online. And I guarantee no one is going to shoot your child down. That is why we have detectives that do undercover work. It's very easy to just access the child when they're in need of something.
Another part is, especially when we talk about, we create these boogeymen, because a lot of times we're not facing reality, and you see this failure to report. We've seen it, what was the high school coach in Western Oklahoma?
Waynoka?
Yeah.
Recently?
And where is that in Oklahoma?
I'm not even sure where it is.
And then we had something in Perry a few years back, and so you see that a lot. And I think, you mentioned that grooming often starts with, other adults.
Yeah, so Investigator Rockford Brown from the Sheriff's Department actually told me that someone that is wanting to take sexual gratification from your child will not only groom the child, but he or she will groom the people around the child, make it seem like it's normal. They will be the person that spends a lot of time with your child, but doesn't seem like it's wrong. They will take special attention to get the parents to trust them with the kid. Hey, you want me to take your kid for ice cream so you can do the dishes and laundry and stuff like that? I'll help you watch your kid. Run. Every time.
So if Ashlynd ever does have a kid, don't ask to babysit. That's what she's saying.
Okay, so I looked at the Stillwater PD cases, and like over half of them were a family relation or someone they knew. I think out of like 100-something cases, there was one babysitter and 2 neighbors.
The whole thing is, hearing this stuff, reading it, it does make you kind of heart sick, because it's tragic, and it hurts families, these kids who go through this, it is tough stuff. Yeah. But I think it's really important for people to have the tools and the knowledge about how this really works and what really happens.
Yeah, and that's what this really goes into is it talks a lot about how to help protect your kid, things like that. Then it has testimony from all 4 of the women, and then it talks about the last is going to have resources and stuff like that. There's a woman named Lauren who was abused by her nanny in, I want to say, Florida. And she started a foundation called Lauren's Kids. And she actually goes to different schools and teaches about this crime. And it's been picked up by several, I want to say 40-ish states now use her curriculum. Oklahoma is not one of the states, but she would like all of the states to start using her curriculum to educate people on child sexual abuse.
And one of the things we talked about, and I'm not sure how much of it's in your stories, but the idea of, go give Aunt Edna a hug.
Yes.
Go sit on so-and-so's lap. You've got to give them a kiss. I mean, the idea that we socialize our kids because we want them to be close to family members to feel like they can't say no to adults. Children are taught. You're supposed to listen to adults. You're supposed to, adults know better. You can't tell them no. You can't be rude. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. And I mean, a lot of that prevention is that bodily autonomy, right? Mm-hmm. Teaching them that if they're uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's what Jordan and I discussed. She is the first victim I spoke to, and she said that she felt like she couldn't tell him no because it was within her family, and she was raised to not talk back to them. You be polite. You are supposed to be seen, not heard, right? Isn't that the saying?
That's what I was told.
Yeah. So, when you teach those kind of things, kids don't feel like they can say no. We need to be teaching the children, you don't have to give so-and-so a hug and a kiss. When we do it to my niece, if she says no, I will not fake cry. I will not pressure her. I will say, okay, Demi Jo, you don't want to give Auntie Ash a hug or a kiss right now? Let's, go jump on the trampoline. Let's play. Let's do something else. I don't force her to do anything she doesn't want to do.
Your love doesn't have strings attached to it.
Exactly, and that's the difference. If you want your children to be protected, it's not enough to say to just watch them around people you don't know. You need to also watch them around people you do know.
Well, and I think also, if your kid tells you that it indicates that someone makes them uncomfortable, or they tell you something.
Yeah, that's what Rockford Brown said. He gave the exact example that if one of his kids were to make allegations against him, believe the kid, because why would the kid lie about something like that? When I go through court cases and I have to see the children actually get on the stand to testify, 90% of the time we have to take multiple recesses because they are crying on the stand. Now, that's not something that they have made up. They have to go into detail about their sexual abuse in front of 12 people that they don't know and everyone in the courtroom, including me. So they are just exposed, for lack of a better word, in front of everyone. And it's embarrassing. Why would they lie about that? They're not trying to get attention. And most people say, oh, well, they're trying to get attention. But what kind of attention is that?
You're also hearing a lot from defense attorneys, which is a whole different kind of psychology.
Sure. I mean, the other thing, too, is the delays in reporting, right? Because sometimes they don't talk about it till they're grown or older.
Yeah, I was looking at the OSU summary activities, and there was someone who reported this year from an assault that happened, I want to say, in like the 70s. And they just reported it now, 2021, and their assault happened in the 70s. So, I mean, for both, last year I looked at adult sexual assaults, and this year I kind of looked at child. They're both very similar in ways that they are not believed, and there's this reporting delay for both of them. And then, but the difference is, as adults, people ask the questions like, what was she wearing? What was she drinking? As children, it's, why were you hanging out with them if they were doing this? Why would you accept the gifts that they were giving if they were making you do this? So there's just a double.
Yeah, listen to adults.
Yeah.
But why weren't you acting like an adult when you're a kid?
Yes, and to quote one of the girls I spoke to this week, she said, I found everything suspicious. I saw him take them to the camper. Why did none of the adults around me seem suspicious when I, as a child, was suspicious? It just blows your mind.
Well, I think the trauma too. Mm-hmm. I mean, it takes a long time to process something like that and work through it.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the shame, the secrecy, and as in the women you interviewed, each one of them thought they were the only one.
Yes.
And so then you hold that because it's like your personal shame, right?
Yeah.
It's not even something you share with other people.
Yeah, and one of them actually tough. She said the only reason she didn't fight harder was because he threatened to do the same thing to her little sister. And he, in fact, did do the same things to her little sister. She didn't even know until recently, within the last couple of years. But, you know, she tried to protect her sister, and she couldn't.
Right.
So it's just all of 4 women are strong in their own unique way, but it was just heartbreaking to hear their stories, honestly.
Well, I think it's going to be a good series. I really do. I think it's going to be very informative. I think it's going to be shocking. I think people will learn things that they need to know. I think people will learn things they never wanted to know. And I think it's both heartbreaking and inspiring when we start to talk to the survivors of this.
Yeah, and you know, over the last 9 months, I've really seen them grow, because it started with, well, I don't want my photos being used and I don't want this, to, yeah, no, don't blur me out. I want to tell my story. I don't want to hide from this anymore. So it's like you see them blossom into these women that are just proud to tell their story of abuse to help someone else. You know, it just
kind of ties into the Me Too movement, right?
Yeah.
Being brave enough to put yourself out there.
Well, and standing up and owning it. And the more people who do that, the more people who say me too, the more likely the more you remove that stigma, right? The more
you don't feel
the more
alone.
someone can. Yeah, the less you feel alone, and the more someone else feels like they can speak up as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So Bo, when is this running?
Next Saturday, September 18th. So
I never guarantee.
I guarantee.
That's why I asked.
I never guarantee publication for
I wasn't trying to take
I guaranteed it.
because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But
hopefully
soon.
nothing major happens.
Yeah,
but
it
soon.
won't be long. Yeah.
And it will be over a period of a few weeks.
Yeah.
Just trying to give listeners some idea of when this is coming.
The suspect that this is centered around gets sentenced next week. So after he's sentenced, I have the green light from everyone to just let it go.
Hit send.
There we go.
So stay tuned.
Okay.
This is a big project. It's an important thing. You've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, literally tears, into this. So I'm excited for people to see it. I hope people really pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. I think that does it for this one. Thank you for joining us in the newsroom. We'll see you later.